Sad.
We'll turn it on soon. I'll turn it on soon. But how's Virginia, Ed?
It's cool. It's getting cold. 32 all last week. Yeah, it's getting dark, like all the time. Getting kind of sad. I wake up, go to work, dark. Leave work, dark. But like I'm not working that long of hours. It's just dark.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Fall colors are coming in, so everything's orange and yellow.
Okay.
Ski season starts in 1 month. I'm hyped.
Sounds fun. I wish I lived up north sometimes. But I live in dumb old Texas.
I like Texas. Hey, my goal is to move back. It's gonna take 7 years, but it's okay.
So are you gonna share your new plan with us, or?
I mean, I can.
That'd be awesome.
I don't know. It won't be very inspirational to an engineering group, but
I don't know, but there's still gonna be some. It's still nice to learn about other paths.
yeah, for sure.
Okay, yeah. So I think we can start soon. Whoever just joins can join. But we will have it recorded, which we can share for everyone else. So yeah, so I'm just gonna share my screen real quick with the presentation. Okay, guys. So thank you everyone for coming today. Today we have been graced by a Lamar alumni, Edward Doan, class of 2020, who will be sharing his role as a materials process and delivery engineer, as well as the career path that he wants to pursue. Just to give a background of what we will be doing today, we'll be having an introduction for about 15 minutes, and the Q&A as well as prepared questions. It is not reflected in this, but it'll be kind of mixed. Y'all can ask questions after the introduction, but if the conversation does need to have a catalyst, we will have some prepared questions to facilitate the conversation. So this is just a little introduction slide that I did have for Ed. So Edward did go to Lamar University. He is a graduate of the class of 2020, and he graduated December of the year. He's majoring in chemical engineering and is minoring in business. So Ed, do you want to share more about the experience that you've had, as well as any other pertinent information that you think we should know?
About Lamar?
Or about you. About you.
About me? Well, grew up in Southeast Texas. I'd been in Texas my entire life. I have family from everywhere. Mom's side, a lot of people in Germany. But for the most part, I grew up in Texas. I had an internship in um, the chemicals industry, specialty chemicals, as well as in oil and gas. So had those prior to joining PNG, where I'm at today.
Sweet, sweet. Thank you for that background. Thank you.
Yeah.
So right now, we can go into our Q&A. If anyone does have any questions for Ed. If not, we can go into prepared questions to kind of help facilitate that discussion.
I have a question. So, Edward, why did you choose to minor in business rather than the typical engineer minors, such as mathematics and chemistry?
Well, actually, I do have a mathematics minor. All you have to do for chemical engineers is take Cal 3, but Cal 3 is part of the required curriculum now. But I just figured that's not really interesting, so I'll leave that out. But in terms of the business minor, so there's kind of a twofold reason for it. The first reason was I I knew that I would want to transition to the business side of engineering. Wasn't really sure when, so I figured since I was already at school and I had a few extra slots, I might as well take a few tack on a business minor. The second reason is kind of a more strategic reason. So something else that you might not know about me is I actually started off as a chemical engineer pre-med student. I was like one of those people. And so at the time, my freshman and sophomore year, I thought I was just going to grab chemical engineering just for the challenge and then go on to med school. But because of that, I ended up deciding not to go down that route, and because of that, I spent my first and second summers, doing not even pursuing engineering internships. And so junior year came around, and I had just finished my internship in the chemicals industry, and I knew that with one internship, it'd be kind of tough to get a job and getting a second internship would push me one semester, basically giving me an extra summer to grab another internship. Oh, actually, I mixed that up. I I did my oil and gas internship first. So that was like kind of like the second hidden reason is I actually did that to extend just one semester so that I have time for a second internship and round out my resume before going on the full-time job hunt. It ended up being going pretty well for me just because that extra semester I was basically able to focus solely on the job hunt, whereas a lot of times if you graduate in May like on schedule, quote unquote, then you're having to like balance doing that versus being president of an org or exec officer of a school of a club, as well as like managing your senior design projects and whatnot. But for me, oh, I finished that. Um, I finished that all in May. So in that following fall, I had just finishing up some business minor classes, and so I had a lot of time to really dedicate to the job hunt, which was especially crucial with COVID and everyone with all the hiring freezes.
Thank you, Ed. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. In that case, then, Ed, just like taking a. Oh,
I have a question.
yeah.
Sorry if you hear my cat screaming in the background, but
No worries.
what's been the biggest challenge you faced transitioning from college life to real life?
Um, I would say the hardest transition. The hardest transition would probably be the learning curve at PNG. This is going to be the same at any given job. But if you've had an internship, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Just the sheer amount of acronyms that you have to pick up in order to even know what's going on in your company. So, like, as an internship, you get a taste of that because you have a few small projects that you have to handle throughout the summer, and you have to learn about how the company works. But whenever you come on as a full-time engineer, they expect you to know. For my particular job, and we can talk about that in a second, but for my particular job, I have to know basically the entire process. at, I would say, probably a medium level. And because of that, there was a lot of learning that was involved, and being pa- being able to dance on the line between asking for help and going on your own to do your own homework is very difficult, especially when it seems like everyone else knows what they're doing. I would say it's the biggest curve.
Shoot. Thank you for that, Edward. Thank you. That's a really good question. I mean, answer too. Sorry, there's someone in the requesting to be added. Oh, there's Zed. Never mind. So does anyone have any questions?
Yes, Ayo has a question.
Hey,
Hey,
Aya.
Aya.
Hi, Ed. I have a follow up to that question. In the beginning, whenever that learning curve is pretty steep, how much of a grace period do they give to you as a full time hire to kind of figure things out? And what did you do in your case to speed up that process
Yeah,
at work and outside of work in your own time?
that's a great question. So there's like a pretty legit grace period of like, I would say the first 2 weeks to a month is for sure a grace period. But honestly, it just comes with every project. So if you have a project in like a new area of the company that you're not familiar with, feel free to shoot all of the questions as you can. Um, I will say though, so my approach, I wouldn't say is perfect because I have gotten feedback that I don't ask enough questions. But my approach typically is in a meeting. Okay, one PNG is like really good about organizing resources. So if you just write down all the acronyms, we actually have an acronym dictionary that you can just click on and type in whatever it is and it'll pop up all the definitions used around the company. A lot of the bigger companies will have something like that. But on top of that, if there's something that you don't know, just write it all down and pick someone after the meeting to walk through all of the questions that you picked up from each meeting and do that iteratively. So like find someone that you know and trust in that meeting early on. It could be even just the person. If you don't know anyone, just ask the whoever's leading that meeting, right? Because whoever's leading that meeting is going to want you to know what's going on. So just writing down all the acronyms, all of the concepts, all of the equipment that you're not familiar with, and then asking them to stay back 10 minutes after the meeting and you just go through all of that and explain how it relates to the project. You do that enough times and you get up to speed. I would say like that's like the grace period where there isn't like a set grace period, but I would say like that first that first month for sure. But from there on, I I would always just write it down and ask them after the meeting. Well, if it's a virtual meeting, you can honestly just ask them during the meeting, if they're not leading it and sharing their screen, right? If a coworker's in that meeting, you can just ask them live. That way you can understand what the word means within the context of what you're talking about. So, I mean, yeah, from there, I would say that's like the biggest grace period. Just make sure if you're unsure about something, ask because it's always better to ask when you're unsure about something than to royally mess something up.
Thanks,
Great
Ed.
question. Yeah.
That's pretty solid advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. And I'm sure that that advice doesn't like, only apply to just full-time hires, right? I mean, that also applies for future interns as well, that are on this call. So thank you for that.
Yep.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, yeah. So in that case, let's just kind of talk about your role, Ed. So just in your role, as the materials and process delivery engineer, what are your main responsibilities, on a day-to-day basis, as well as the bigger picture projects that you have?
Yeah, so I guess to better understand my role, I'm just gonna glide through the general structure of pretty much every single engineering organization. Um, so typically, whenever you start, you're going to be put on a single piece of equipment, and then your job is to just work on that equipment. If it messes up, you fix it. You keep an eye on it day in and day out, right? Every company has a different name for it, but basically, it's that it's it's basically like the equipment owner, process engineer, etc. Um, then or production engineer is often what they call it. So then you have like the process engineer who keeps an eye on the machine, but instead of on a day-to-day basis, they typically look at it from like a month-to-month basis. So what can we do better about last month versus this month, right? Um, there's obviously your electrical engineers, and then that manage all of the wiring, and then there's also like material engineers that manage like the equipments. So if you want to compare this to like running a house, right? Um, the process engineer would be the person who's like coming up with what are we going to eat for the rest of the week, and then manages getting the groceries, making sure that happens. The production engineer would be the person actually cooking on the stove, um, and then as well as fixing the stove when it breaks. So my job as a material engineer is basically whenever groceries come in, or in our case, raw materials come in, we make sure that they're up to spec, and that if they come in out of spec, why? What's the technical reason that being off spec could be a risk? And then moving that, and then allow making sure that the team has the rationale to move forward. In addition, a big part of my job is validation. So that's a word that you'll hear a lot when if you've had an internship. But basically what that means is that for any big company, if you have a machine and then it works, they do the companies really want to make sure that if you mess with it, it stays working, right? So any single change that's made is carefully recorded. Its risk are carefully written down, as well as, for example, if I want to change the liquids that are going in to the system, right? Then how much cooling does it need? How much heating does it need? Will it be able to mix as well as the old liquid? Will it have any microbiology issues? What's the flow? Do we need a different pump? All these things happen just for that one change. And so my my area is managing those changes for the materials themselves. So for us, I work in the dry sheets division at PNG. So it would be the coat mix, basically like the waxy stuff that you feel, managing that, as well as managing the perfumes that are associated with it. On top of that, me and my coworker were the only people, I think, pretty much in the world actually, that have control over the exact formula, so the exact percentages of each of our raw materials, and have the ability to change those percentages that goes into the different dry sheets. So like Bounce Outdoor Fresh, it has a different formulation than Bounce Fresh Linen, which has a different formulation than Downy or Gain, right? P&G owns all of those, and so a big part of our job is managing those formulas.
Thank you for that, Ed. Are there any questions that stem from that answer that Ed has?
Honestly, to be fair, I didn't really know what I did for the first 3 months, so it's okay if you don't understand either. This role, they hired me in partly because they didn't have anyone to go into, go into the role, but it's typically a second rotation. It's not a entry level job. So yeah, this job is, it's okay if it's kind of hard to understand because it's not really meant to be easy to understand. And typically, whenever you start on the job, you'll have an easier to understand role. My role is slightly more nebular, abstract, so it's okay. Don't feel bad.
What's usually like an entry level role at PNG?
So whenever you apply to PNG, you apply as a manufacturing engineer, and then based on business need as well as your major and background, you get put into different roles. So I know a chemical engineer out. I know a few chemical engineers out of Florida that are in quality. So basically, that uh you basically want to make sure that the product that you send out is exactly the same every single time. So for example, whenever you go to Walmart and you buy Band-Aid, then you can buy it confidently, know without opening it inside. You know that it has exactly 10 Band-Aids. You know that the Band-Aids are going to be sticky, that they're going to have the cotton in the middle, it's not going to stick to a wound, and that it's cut in the right shape. But if I were to give you some Band-Aids that I made myself, there's no guarantee that it's going to be in a square, going to be in a circle. Maybe I fat fingered and I counted it wrong, right? So that's what quality does. They make sure that all of the products work work and come out the exact same way. So there's a lot of work to be done to make sure like our boxes have exactly 120 sheets and they're cut the exact same way and that they're stacked perfectly. They smell good, they look good. And in chemical companies, the equivalent would be just making sure your the chemical that you're putting out is the right color, it has the right percentages of at a refinery. You might want to make sure your jet fuel works like jet fuel. You want to make sure your gasoline has the right percentages to become 87, and you're not mislabeling 87 gasoline as 93 gasoline, right? So you can go into as quality, you can go as a machine, um, like basically like a machine expert. You can go into electrical engineering, um, and programming, logic, process control, that type of work. You can go that at P&G, you can actually go into supply chain as well. So one of my good friends, um, got put into the supply chain role. So that's basically making sure that all of the lines have what they need when they need it. Um, it sounds pretty simple, and I guess it is pretty simple if you have just one line to manage. But when you're working at the scale of a lot of these bigger companies, it becomes a task for a whole team to manage. Making
Thank you.
sure, yeah,
Thank you for that. And then also, we do have a question from Desmond,
yeah,
and he asked, are the quality engineers basically the last people to see the product before it goes out into the stores?
that's a great question. So quality, okay, that's one way to do it, right? So a lot of times it's not the quality engineers that are actually taking a look at every single product that's coming out. That's often left up to the individual lines because we have so many lines. So what quality really does is whenever a line is like, hey, this one's not right, the quality engineers take that and then they actually work with us a lot because I don't know if you remember, but our descriptions were kind of similar in which we manage materials. They work with us. So basically someone alerts quality that, hey, something's not right here. The quality works with us to figure out what happened with that batch based on different complaints, based on flow trends, based on different issues that we had with the prior line. So like one line will feed into we'll just say like line A will feed into line B. And so if something comes out wrong with line B, then we're like, okay, is it because of line A? Is it because our machines aren't working? Is it because there was an operator error? Um, but basically, they do a lot of work in managing the changes. So remember when I told you they make sure the changes are very carefully documented? That's them actually doing that. I'm the one trying to make things change. They're the ones managing to make sure that we're not changing stuff too quick and for without a very good reason, as well as kind of figure whenever something bad is reported, they're basic they along with us are working together to investigate what's going on and why. It might be maybe something is going wrong because of a change, right? And they would be the ones that would be on top of what all is being changed.
Thank you for that, Ed.
Yep.
So just another question. So rather than taking, the oil and gas route or the chemical route that Lamar engineers usually take, why did you ultimately go for PNG?
Yeah, so there's kind of two sides of the coin here. There's like the professional answer and then there's like the real answer, right? So the professional answer is that I explored the oil and gas industry in my first internship. I explored the chemicals industry in the second internship, and that I really wanted to explore another industry where you could actually touch and see and feel the impact of your finished product. Whereas in the oil and gas and chemical industry, um, you don't really get to see the fruits of your labor. It's always contained in a pipe. In fact, like if you see your product, you're probably having a bad day, right? Um, the real answer is I thought it was a really good opportunity, but also it was like post COVID and was my only offer, low key. But I'm pretty happy here. I think if I had a few other offers, I would still take PNG over them for my professional reason, as well as I think it'd be cool to to live in a new place. Right now I live in Virginia. Um and I'm only an hour and a half from DC, and my girlfriend had moved up to DC the year before. So it actually just made a ton of sense from a bunch of different angles. But low key, like between me and you guys, don't feel bad if you only have one offer. Everyone always shows their highlights on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on their resume, but sometimes you only get one offer and that's it.
Thank you for that. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so we'll move on. So Ed, so why are you pursuing an MBA on top of your chemical engineering degree? And how
Great question.
do you plan to use an MBA in the future?
Great question. So, um, long story short, I started like reading up on business news whenever I started my first internship. I figured since I would since I had money for the first time, I wanted to invest in the stock market, but I didn't know anything about what any company did. And so I started reading up on business news, and it just really interested me in like the big decisions that are made in terms of um for example, my first internship was with a small company called Athlon, but they got acquired by Halliburton. And so then I became over that summer I worked from Athlon. I interviewed with Athlon but interned with Halliburton. And so reading about why companies buy other companies, reading about why companies decide to build a plant versus decide to shut them down, reading about the other really high level decisions that basically decide that people make to steer a company around was really interesting to me. So that was particularly that was really cool, and I knew I wanted to switch over from like the technical side of engineering over to the business side. And so the third reason why I added that business minor was that last semester where it was very light compared to taking 16 to 18 hours of engineering classes on top of student government and a few other organizations, to basically doing almost nothing and taking 14 hours of like sophomore and junior level business classes. Gave me a bunch of time to job hunt as well as prepare for my MBA applications. So that didn't really answer why I did the MBA, but just kind of a side note. Taking that extra semester is very underrated in my opinion. But yeah, at a high level, I found it really interesting that you that getting a good MBA is kind of a ticket to being part of the big decisions being made around a company.
Definitely. So how do you plan to use your MBA in the future?
Yeah, so that's part I'm still figuring out. So for those of you that don't know, I got into a deferred MBA program. So basically that means that I got accepted this past summer. So you apply as a senior in college. For me, since I was a December graduate, I applied with the following May grad. So I actually applied while I was at PNG. And if they accept you into one of these programs, you basically have a window in which you can choose to go from 2 to 4 or even 2 to 5 years from now. So for me, I have a window between 2023 to 2025 to start. And so I think I'm going with 2024, but basically what I'm saying is I have quite a bit of time to decide. I'm not 100% sure yet.
Okay, thank you. But are there any current paths that you'd like to pursue or are pursuing?
Yeah, I'm thinking of. So I've played around with the idea of going into a business role within like a traditional engineering company, but I've also kind of thought about completely switching from engineering to something like real estate. That's a pretty in-depth conversation for another day. But yeah, if you're interested in talking about like why I'm pursuing something that I worked 4 years for, um, let me know later. But yeah, nothing is off the table. Let's say that.
That works out. So like another question that I do have about the MBA program is that anyone can get an MBA, right, Ed? Like anyone of any major can get one, right? Like it isn't only.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't need to be a business major to apply for these programs. In fact, a lot of them actually really like engineering majors because of your analytical, the ability for you to think analytically and think logically, which is something that you pretty much only get from grinding a bunch of equations, right? Uh, so yeah, if that's something you're mildly interested in, I would love to talk to you and like share more about my experience and like how yeah, just share about my experience, but don't count yourself out if you thinking about getting an MBA without engineering experience or without business experience. They really love engineering majors.
Thank you for that, Ed. Does anyone have any questions?
Edward, so you were accepted into Harvard's business program, correct?
Yeah.
What was that application process like?
Oh man, that was the most daunting application I've ever done. So a lot of these MBA programs, it's kind of your typical application like you do for undergrad. So instead of your ACT, SAT, you either take the GMAT or your GRE. So I chose the GMAT. I studied for that during my internship before graduating, and then got my GMAT score. It was in the range that I was happy with, and then start the, every you ask for your recommendations, and then you once the application opens, you start working on figuring on like you pull the essay questions and you answer them. So the typical two questions they'll ask you is what do you want to do with your MBA, and why do you want to go to this particular school. So like every single school has their own nuances that you really need to do research on, or I had to do research on. You guys do not necessarily need to do research on, just ask me and I'll be happy to share. Um, but yeah, you need to be able to talk about why you want to go to that school and then apply um, and wait to hear back. Harvard was interesting because they're the only school that had like a that didn't ask those questions. Their essay question was just one question. It was there's no word limit, there's no word minimum. All the other essays had word limits or word minimums. It was just one question. What do you think the admission board should know about you? That's it. So really open to interpretation. I spent a lot of time figuring out what I wanted to write about. Yeah, if any of you are interested, happy to walk you through that process.
Thank you,
But
Ed.
that was that. I would say that's like the biggest thing is that one question was like super scary.
Whenever you're applying for for any like MBA program or like the higher, well, let's just say higher level MBA programs like Rice, like the Ivy Leagues, what score, should you be aiming for like the GMAT?
Yeah, look up your school. Look up the school that you're interested in and just say like 10 points above that on the GMAT. I don't know the GRE scores just because I didn't take the GRE yet, and I didn't do research on the GRE. But like I think if I recall correctly, Rice's GMAT was around 695 or
Yep.
705. And so then you just want to be slightly above that to be competitive, right? So 710, 720 would be great. And it goes up to 800, but yeah, 800's like really hard to get. Don't worry about getting an 800. But yeah, just aim for 10 to 20 points above, and I think you'd be competitive
That's
from a
good.
GMAT perspective.
So going into an MBA program, like on top of the GMAT, uh, we do have to have a good GPA, right?
Yeah.
As well as extracurriculars. So for the extracurriculars, what do these MBA programs look for in terms of it, in terms of extracurriculars?
So they'll be looking for what they call demonstrated leadership, right? So that basically means that they want to see you have leadership roles, potentially multiple leadership roles around campus. But more importantly, they want to see demonstrated interest in whatever you're pursuing, right? So at the time, I was pursuing engineering, uh, like engineering strategy type roles. So that was like right up the alley with my two engineering internships. But really, what I mean by that is you can't go into an application and say, "Oh yeah, I want to work on renewable energy, um, and my goal is to get an MBA and do and go into renewables." But then if you take a look at your resume, you didn't join any renewable clubs. You didn't take the initiative to start a renewable club. You didn't look for renewable internships. And so maybe you do want to go into renewables, but in their eyes, based on your resume, you didn't really like quote unquote try for it. So it basically needs to be like proof over a multi-year horizon that you're a leader and that you have a legitimate interest in what you say you have an interest in. If that makes sense.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Thank you for that. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay. I do have one more question, Ed, and this kind of goes back to your role as a process, so materials and process and delivery engineer.
Sure.
So, how do you use your chemical engineering concepts in your role? Just because, like in your role, like I feel like it doesn't have as much, like heat transfer, learning about heat exchangers and valves. So I was kind of wondering how you use the concepts that you did learn and apply it to your current role right now.
Yeah, great question. So in terms of like technical engineering, I'm not really sitting down calculating the output of heat from like a machine, right? But at a high level, it is very useful to basically be able to see how a machine works and understand what's going on and how that affects like that material because you've put in so many reps doing that type of work, like whether in fluids or whether in heat, um, whatever other major you guys might be doing. Uh, for example, right? I think many of you can relate to this. Is we've all taken enough math classes to where if someone says that I don't know, I saw an alligator. I'm trying to think of a good example. Like you can see, this is such a bad example, but like if you see like a basket of strawberries, right? And then someone says that um it got someone smashed it with a hydraulic press down to a third, then because you work with fractions long enough to know that a third is slightly less than a half and that that basket should be about a third full of the strawberries, and because you know that a strawberry is basically a solid and that it's but it has like I don't know, it's a really bad example, but basically because you understand numbers, you're able to quickly pick up other things that involve numbers, if that makes sense. That's that's the best way I can put it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense for me at least. But that's all the prepared questions I do have. In the crowd, does anyone have any other questions before Ed leaves?
Yeah, I have a question, Edward.
Sure.
What was your most impactful moment that you think at Lamar that has happened that sort of led you down this path?
Down to the MBA.
Yeah, that path. Or it doesn't even have to be that. Just sort of what do you think was like a pivot point during your college career?
Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
That basically like made me rethink about pursuing engineer from a technical perspective.
Yeah.
I would say probably that first internship when I started reading. I read more. I knew more about what Halliburton was doing as a company and what Halliburton was doing versus its competitors and what their moat was versus versus what I knew about what the company did, like what my team actually did. I think was that moment. Like I would spend hours after work just reading through about like what Halliburton's acquiring, what they're doing in the past, what their competitors are acquiring, why they're doing that, issues related to oil wells, issues related to the service industry as a whole, um, what their competitive advantage was, like that type of stuff. I actually really enjoyed reading about and spent a lot of time outside of work doing, even like more so than video games. I was like, we might be onto something here.
I gotcha. And follow-up question: if you could go back and talk to yourself, say freshman or junior year or sophomore year, before senior year, what advice would you give yourself?
What advice? I would say it's hard to say, right? Like, I mean, I think I'm in a pretty decent spot right now, if given like I didn't have advice for my future self. Um, but I would say just one thing. I would say just drop pre-med, man. Like I had some thoughts my freshman year about like this doesn't feel 100% right. Like honestly, within the first week of my first biology class, I was like, this is not fun. I don't know about this one, chief. Just cut the cord. Uh, really listen to your inner self and don't worry about percep what people think you should be. Let me say it that way, right? Because what people think of you is kind of important in the sense that you want to treat people well, right? And if a lot of people are like giving you a lot of bad feedback, then maybe you're that person, right? I mean, there's like the saying, if someone passes you on the right on the freeway, then like they're the asshole. But if a lot of people pass you up on the right on the freeway, you're the asshole, right? So it's like listening to feedback is important, but also really taking some time to listen to yourself and tapping into who you authentically are instead of like going down the path everyone's expecting you to. Which for me, that was like going into medicine because since like late middle school, I had told everyone I was going to medicine. So I had a lot of self-doubt and self-esteem issues because I didn't want to let everyone down that I wasn't going to do something that I thought that everyone had thought I was going to do. Turns out it's not a big deal. No one's paying that much attention to you. Don't worry about it.
That's good advice, Ed. That's good advice.
Yeah.
Um, so does anyone have any questions about that?
Yes. What would you say were some of the important lessons you learned early on working full time that you might not necessarily know or have known unless like you were working full time? Say like things you would have come across that you didn't come across in your internship.
Yeah. Um so I kind of alluded to it earlier, but the whenever you get hired on as a full-time person, they expect you to know everything, right? Like if they give you information, they want you to know it. Whenever you're an intern, they don't necessarily give you that level of detail because they honestly just want you to have just enough information for you to carry out your project, and that's pretty much it. So they'll give you it might feel like a lot, but it's honestly like a water fountain compared to the fire hose of information that they're gonna throw at you whenever you come in as a full time. Just because as a full time they want you to be completely up to speed. That's something that I thought I was ready to handle, but it hit me a little harder than I would like to admit.
Thanks
Thank you
for
for
the heads
that.
up on that one.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any more questions?
Also, I'll stick
Yes.
around a little bit after just to take some off the record questions if you have any.
Thank you for
I
that,
have a
Ed.
follow up to the question I had just asked.
Yeah.
So in that early period, I know you kind of touched on some of this already, but how did you manage yourself to where like you weren't feeling like a dum dum the entire time?
You don't. So honestly, one thing that really helped was becoming friends with like your coworkers, like not your coworkers, but like your fellow new hires. So, one of the people I work with, I work with her probably the only person I work more than her is my actual team and quality. But like after them, I probably work with her third most. And like one day when we had finished a meeting, I just asked her like how does everyone seem like to know what they're doing? Like Anastasia knows what she's doing, Trevor knows what she's doing, like other new hires. And like real talk, I have no idea what I'm doing and I feel like everyone's judging me for it. Turned out felt exactly the same and she didn't know I felt that way because it looked like I knew what I was doing. And so like knowing that you're not alone, you're going to have imposter syndrome, but hopefully you join a big enough company where you have at least one other new hire that you can kind of confide in and like kind of bounce ideas back and forth as to how you two are doing and like how you're transitioning into the company, because it might feel like you're super behind and honestly might have been a little behind, but knowing that you're not alone, and even if you are alone, that you're in a position that other people have been in before, and to not judge yourself too harshly.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ed. Does anyone have any more questions, by the way? Okay. I do have one more final question, Ed, for you, if that's cool with
Sure.
you. Um, if it's too deep, don't be afraid to say no. But I wanted to ask, about this. So you did talk about self-doubt, right? And I was kind of wondering, how did you overcome that self-doubt? Because I feel like that is something that a lot of people face today. And just no, getting advice from someone who has faced it and overcome it would be, great to hear from.
Yeah, so I will say I've been working really hard to be better with my emotions, but I tend to kind of deviate from using my emotions to deal with this type of stuff. And so basically, because I didn't know what I was doing, I poured all of my energy into researching other jobs to see what was out there to see if anything clicked. Um, would be like kind of like the logic way that I dealt with it. But in terms of like the feeling, so like I don't know if you're familiar with like logos, pathos, ethos, but like the logo side of me went really hard into reading hundreds of articles and blogs. And honestly, any single time that someone came to speak, whether that was like at an event, um, maybe on LinkedIn, maybe at a networking event or whatever, I always ask them, how do you know that this is what you wanted to do? And I've asked probably at least 200 people that range from people slightly older than me that just started their jobs or just started whenever I was still in school, to people that like had very successful careers that were like nearing retirement. And this kind of ties back to the whole you're not by yourself. Every single person I've talked to, barring one person I've met from Australia who's different, that man's just built different. But everyone else I've talked to doesn't know what they're doing. Everyone's just trying to figure it out. Everyone's trying to make the best decision that they can make with the information that they have. And so the key point is you need to have a goal, but don't be afraid to change your goals if you're given new information.
Thank you for
And
that, Ed.
everyone's facing it. Nobody knows what they're doing. Despite how shiny their resume is, no one knows what they're doing.
Thank you for that. That does help a lot. That does help a lot.
Yep.
So it's nearing 7:30. So we are going to kind of end uh, the official questions for Ed. But if you guys have any other questions that y'all want to linger for, don't be afraid. Ed did offer that he'll be sticking around. But again, Ed, thank you for coming tonight.
Yeah,
This really
of
helps
course.
us, helping us find what we want to do, and also help us, find out what we need to do to get to where we need to be. So thank you.
Yeah, you guys got it.
All right. So yeah, so I'm just gonna stop recording now. So if you guys have any questions off the record, y'all can ask now. If not,